He was just an old man, forgotten by most, spending his lonely days on a park bench. But when he offered scraps of food to a stray dog, he never imagined the animal would return with something so precious, a gift that would shatter his heart and heal it forever. Arthur sat alone on the park bench, his weathered hands resting on a wooden cane. The leaves around him rustled gently in the autumn breeze, but the silence in his heart was louder than any sound. For years, this park had been his refuge, a place where he could sit quietly, away from the heavy loneliness that followed him home every night. Once, life had been full of laughter. His wife's warm smile, his children's playful voices, the bustle of family dinners, it had all been there. But time has a way of taking more than it gives. His wife had passed on, and his children had moved far away, too busy with their own lives to visit often. Now, the house felt like an empty shell, echoing with memories that only deepened his solitude. Every morning, Arthur followed the same routine. He brewed his tea, read the paper, and made his way to the park. Sitting under the old oak tree, he watched the world move around him. Couples strolling hand in hand, children racing each other, friends laughing over coffee. He smiled faintly at their joy, but deep inside, he longed for companionship, for someone to notice he was still there. One crisp afternoon, as Arthur sat in his usual spot beneath the oak tree, he noticed movement at the edge of the path. A dog, thin, scruffy, and wary, stood a few feet away, its dark eyes fixed on him. Its ribs showed through its fur, and its tail hung low, neither wagging nor threatening. Arthur could tell instantly. It was hungry. Slowly, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out half a sandwich he had brought from home. His hand trembled as he held it out, uncertain if the creature would come closer. The dog hesitated, ears flicking back, then took a cautious step forward. Its nose twitched, sniffing the air, before it snatched the piece of bread and darted back. For the first time in months, he felt something stir inside him, a flicker of connection. The next day, the same dog appeared again, watching him from a distance. This time, Arthur was ready. He set aside a bit of food just in case, and just like that, a silent understanding began between them. Neither spoke, of course, but both seemed to recognize they had found something they desperately needed. Company. Days turned into weeks, and what began as a cautious encounter grew into a quiet ritual. Every afternoon, without fail, Arthur made his way to the park with a small bag of food tucked beneath his arm. And every afternoon, the dog appeared, waiting at a respectful distance until Arthur settled onto the bench. It no longer bolted away after snatching its meal. Instead, it lingered, sitting a few feet from him, its sharp eyes softened with trust. Arthur found himself talking to the dog as if it could understand. "You know," he would say with a gentle smile, "this park feels less empty when you're here." The dog would tilt its head, ears pricked, as though listening. Sometimes, it crept closer, resting on the ground near his shoes. The warmth of its body easing Arthur's loneliness more than words ever could. Passers-by began to notice the unlikely pair, the frail old man with his cane, and the loyal German shepherd who never left his side. Some would smile, others would whisper, but Arthur didn't mind. For the first time in years, he looked forward to each day that he woke with purpose, knowing someone, no matter how unlikely, was waiting for him. What started as scraps of bread had blossomed into companionship. In feeding the dog, Arthur was unknowingly feeding something else too, his own starving heart. Arthur often found himself speaking aloud as the dog sat patiently beside him, its head resting on its paws. At first, it felt strange, talking to an animal as though it were a confidant. But soon, the words poured out naturally, as though the dog had been sent there just to listen. He told stories about his late wife, Margaret, how she loved roses in the spring, and how her laughter filled every corner of their little house. He spoke of his children, now grown with families of their own, living in far-off cities he rarely visited. The dog never interrupted, never judged, only listened with quiet devotion. Sometimes, when memories grew too heavy, Arthur would pause, his voice breaking. The dog would lift its head, edging closer until its warm body pressed against his leg. That simple gesture was enough to steady him, enough to remind him that he wasn't truly invisible. In those moments, Arthur realized something profound. The dog wasn't just a hungry stray anymore. It was his friend, his silent healer, stitching together the cracks in his lonely heart. What grief had taken, this unexpected companion was slowly, quietly giving back. One chilly morning, Arthur arrived at the park, came tapping softly against the pavement. He expected to see the dog waiting in its usual spot, tail thumping against the ground. But today was different. The dog trotted toward him with something clutched firmly in its mouth. Arthur squinted, puzzled. It wasn't the usual stick or scrap of paper a stray might carry. The dog laid it gently at his feet, then stepped back, wagging its tail with an almost expectant look, as if saying, "This is for you." Bending down slowly, Arthur picked it up. His breath caught. It was a small, worn box, its surface weathered with age. He carefully lifted the lid and found inside a tarnished silver locket. His trembling fingers opened it, and inside was a faded photograph, a woman smiling warmly, holding a baby in her arms. Arthur's heart skipped a beat. Though time had blurred the picture, he recognized the face instantly. It was Margaret, his late wife, captured in a moment he thought he had lost forever. Tears welled in his eyes as he stared at the gift. The dog tilted its head, watching him closely. Somehow, this loyal creature had brought him a piece of his past, a treasure he hadn't seen in decades. Arthur clutched the locket to his chest, his voice breaking. "Margaret," he whispered. For the first time in years, he felt her presence close again. And it was all because of the dog. Arthur's hands shook as he held the locket, his vision blurred by tears. The years of loneliness, the weight of silence in his home, the ache of missing Margaret, all of it came rushing back in a single, overwhelming wave. He sank onto the bench, burying his face in his hands, the sobs breaking free after years of being locked inside. The dog pressed closer, nudging his knee with its nose, then resting its head gently on his lap. Arthur reached down, fingers sinking into its fur, clutching tightly as if the animal were an anchor keeping him from drowning in grief. "How did you know?" he whispered hoarsely, though he knew there could be no answer. Yet, in that moment, he didn't need one. The gift wasn't just a locket. It was a reminder that he hadn't been forgotten, that love, in some form, still found its way back to him. Arthur bent forward, forehead resting against the dog's head. His tears fell freely, but so did a quiet sense of relief. "Thank you," he murmured, voice trembling. "Thank you for bringing her back to me." For the first time in years, Arthur wept not just from sorrow, but from gratitude. From that day forward, Arthur was no longer the same man who once sat alone on a park bench, invisible to the world. The locket hung close to his heart, a cherished reminder of love lost but never forgotten. And beside him, without fail, was the dog, the faithful companion who had given him back more than he ever imagined. Neighbors began to notice the change. The old man who once walked with a stoop now carried himself with quiet purpose, his eyes brighter, his smile gentler. Children often ran up to pet the dog, and Arthur would laugh softly, joining in their joy. The bond between man and animal grew. Unshakable. Arthur had fed the dog's body, but the dog had fed his soul. What began as an act of kindness had transformed into the greatest gift of all, friendship that healed a broken heart.